All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at what is honestly one of the ultimate theological paradoxes in history. How exactly the second person of the Trinity became fully human without losing a single ounce of his divinity. We're going to explore this through Dr. Robert A. Peterson's systematic framework, which meticulously lays out the proofs of Christ's humanity. It's a deep, beautiful mystery, and honestly, by looking at the specific evidence, we can really start to appreciate what the incarnation meant on a gritty, practical, earthly level.
To truly grasp this mystery, we're going to build our case block by block using 4 primary pillars. 1. Physical needs and weaknesses. 2. Displaying real human emotions. 3. Ordinary human experiences. And 4. His relationship with the Father.
Okay, so moving right into section 1, physical needs and weaknesses, our first pillar of humanity. Let's see how this builds our understanding of a Savior who experienced the exact same physical limitations that we do.
You know, when we think of the Almighty, we naturally think of endless power, right? We think of a being who literally sustains the universe, which naturally brings up a pretty provocative question about Jesus' time on earth. Could the eternal Son of God actually experience physical fatigue? Like, could he actually get tired?
Well, the answer, remarkably, is yes. God on earth got completely exhausted. The theologian John Calvin actually pointed this out regarding the Gospels. Jesus was not play-acting here. He wasn't just pretending to be tired to teach us some nice moral lesson. While God in heaven obviously cannot get tired, God on earth, wrapped in human flesh, absolutely could.
And John chapter 4, verse 6 brilliantly illustrates this genuine physical weakness. It says he was so exhausted from walking those dusty roads of Samaria that he simply had to sit down and rest at Jacob's well. He needed to stop. He literally needed to recover.
So the crucial point here is embracing this incredible tension. On one hand, we have God in heaven, totally incapable of exhaustion, hunger, or physical needs. But on the other hand, we have God on earth, capable of deep, deep weariness. And this extended to intense physical suffering too, like the genuine thirst he experienced on the cross when he declared, "I thirst," and actually refused a sedative so he could experience the full agony of the atonement. It included the brutal, gritty reality of physical and psychological temptation out in the wilderness.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the insight into just how intense those temptations were. Theologian Marguerite Schuster noted in Dr. Peterson's source material that Jesus' temptations were actually keener and harder than ours. Why? Well, because unlike us, he was always walking this razor-sharp knife edge of temptation. You see, we often give in, and when we do, we feel a terrible, sinful relief from the pressure. Jesus never experienced the release of finally giving in to sin. He bore the absolute maximum weight of temptation every single time, resisting all the way to the end.
All right, on to section 2, displaying real human emotions, the second pillar of humanity. Here we find that the God-man was not some stoic robot just gliding above the fray of human life. He possessed a deeply expressive, highly responsive human heart.
He displayed profound, sometimes totally overwhelming emotions. In Mark 3, he gets justly, righteously angry, and deeply grieved by the Pharisees' lack of compassion for a man with a withered hand. In John 2, we see his righteous anger blazing as he literally drives the money changers out of the temple for exploiting worshipers. And then, of course, there's that crushing, heart-wrenching sorrow in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he confesses that his soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the very point of death.
And then there's this incredible moment. The shortest verse in the Bible visually isolates the profound emotional weight of the incarnation. When confronted with the death of his friend Lazarus and seeing the weeping of Mary in the crowd, Jesus wept. Think about that. He knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, yet he still genuinely mourned. He felt the sting of death and the pain of his friends. He had a real, beating human heart.
Moving to section 3, ordinary human experiences, the third pillar of humanity. Let's look at the entirely normal human experiences of being born, growing up day by day, and eventually dying.
This actually brings us to a deep, kind of mind-bending concept that theologians call the extra-Calvinisticum. Here we're contrasting the logos asarkos, which is the eternal word outside the flesh, with the logos ensarkos, the word incarnate. It essentially explains how the eternal word was actively sustaining the entire universe at the exact same moment he was a helpless baby lying in a manger. His divine nature wasn't limited by his human body, which preserves the reality of the Trinity even during the incarnation.
And this is exactly why early Christians referred to Mary using the Greek term Theotokos. It translates to God-bearer. Now, as Dr. Peterson points out, this wasn't created to elevate Mary to some divine status, not at all.
It was meant to affirm the incredible grace and reality of what actually happened. The baby she was literally carrying in her womb was truly God in human flesh.
Dr. Peterson gives us some incredibly relatable anecdotes here. According to Luke chapter 2, Jesus grew. He didn't just pop out as a fully formed adult, right? Just like Mary and Joseph probably marked his physical growth on a carpenter's doorframe, Jesus also had to grow intellectually, in wisdom. He grew spiritually, having devotions and praying to the Father over years to mature. He even had to learn and develop social skills, growing in favor with man. He experienced perfectly normal human growth in every single way, apart from sin.
This timeline really cements the reality of his human life cycle. It shows a clear progression from infancy to a 12-year-old astonishing the teachers in the temple, to a 30-year-old man beginning his public ministry, and ending ultimately in the most final of all human experiences, physical death.
And that brings us to Section 4, Relationship with the Father, the fourth pillar of humanity. Let's examine how his unique earthly relationship with God the Father proves his true humanity. To really understand his earthly obedience, we have to define what theologians call economic subordination. Now, this is a purely functional, temporary submission undertaken specifically for the purpose of our salvation. It absolutely does not mean he's essentially inferior to the Father in his divine nature. It simply highlights the specific role he willingly took on during the incarnation to accomplish his mission.
And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates how to read some of the more confusing passages in the Bible. When Jesus says in John 14, "The Father is greater than I," he isn't making an eternal statement about the Trinity being unequal. Scratch that idea entirely. He's making a temporal, earthly statement about his voluntary, functional submission as the God-man on earth who is preparing to return to the Father.
Throughout the Gospel of John, we see this functional submission in constant action. He honors the Father, seeking God's glory rather than his own, and he perfectly obeys God's commands, even the unique command to lay down his own life and take it up again. He lived in total, perfect reliance on the Father, showing us exactly what perfect humanity was always designed to look like. Which leads us directly to the culmination of this explainer and the ultimate resolution of our opening paradox. It's a heavy question, but we have to ask it. If Jesus was truly God, did God die on the cross?
The answer requires us to hold both natures together. God in heaven cannot die. But the profound truth here is that the eternal God took on human flesh, becoming God on earth, for the express purpose of becoming capable of physical death. He became man so that he could die.
The writer of Hebrews captures this so beautifully. Because we share in flesh and blood, he partook of the exact same things. It was the unified person of Christ whose human body and soul separated on the cross. He joined perfectly with the human race, stepping right into our ultimate weakness, death itself, to destroy the power of death and secure our salvation.
So I want to leave you with this question to ponder today. When you really strip away the familiarity of the story, how does knowing that the creator of the universe actually had to learn to walk, felt utter physical exhaustion, cried real tears over a dead friend, and functionally submitted himself to the Father fundamentally transform your understanding of his love for you? He didn't save us from a distance. He stepped right into the dirt and pain of our reality. Think on that as you go about your day.